Hello and welcome to episode 82 of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us at the Page One podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing process, how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. Now, regular listeners will be expecting to hear Tariq at this point as well, but he's not been able to join me for this intro and outro part of the podcast. If you tuned in last week, you'll know he was having issues with his internet, and this week he's having even more issues as he's moving house. So he should be back for next week's episode, I'm pleased to say, and he is in the main part of the podcast as well, which this week features not one but two great guests. We have Abir Mukherjee, who is the Times best-selling author of the Sam Wyndham series of crime novels set in the Raj era in India. His debut, A Rising Man, won the CWA Endeavour Dagger for the best historical crime novel of 2017. And as we'll hear on the podcast, after having worked in finance for a number of years, he turned his hand to writing quite successfully with an entry into a competition that got that first book published. Our second guest is Vaseem Khan, who is the author of two crime series set in India, the Baby Ganesh Agency series set in modern Mumbai, and the Malabar House historical crime novel set in 1950s Bombay. And again, Vaseem is a multi-award winning author, and it was great fun speaking to both of them together. We thought we'd get them on together because they also are the hosts of their own podcast, the Red Hot Chilli Writers podcast. And they had actually had Tariq on as a guest, and we invited them on to the Page One podcast in return. And it's a really fun and perhaps a bit of a different style of chat, given that there are four of us in the chat this time. But I think it flows well, and it's good fun, and still a lot to learn from what they have to say. So I won't hold it up anymore. I'll just play a quick advert for our Page One Writer's Notebook, and I'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and just to let you know about next week's guest. The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy, and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with Page One.
Did you both always want to be writers?
Sorry, are you recording already?
I am. Yeah, I've just jumped. I've gone straight into it.
No, you go first.
Professionals, they're professionals. There's no join there. You see, they just go straight into it. Come on, answer the man.
We could have said something crazy off.
No, I was going to say.
I was hoping you were, and then you wouldn't know it was recording.
This is also live.
Marco, your voice, you sound like melted chocolate. It's just. I'm telling you, Vas, this is what we need. We need whatever software Marco is using to mask his voice.
You know what he should do? He should take over from Clooney with the advertising of the what do you call it? The
Nespresso.
Cafe.
Yes. There you are, Marco.
Yeah, you
Well,
go.
ask me the damn question, you fool.
What was the question?
Did you always want to be a writer?
Yes. I have to say yes. Well, for as long as I can remember, as an adult, yeah. As a child, I always wanted to be in finance because I watched a film called The Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox, right? Here's a tip. Never choose your career based on a film you watch at 13.
At least you didn't want to be a werewolf, I suppose.
It was that. Yeah, I set my sights low. But no, I mean, since probably 50 or 60 year at school, I always wanted to write. I remember, I grew up in Scotland like you guys did, so I did 6 year studies. So I have a proper education, unlike Vaseem, who grew up in England. And I was the only one in my class who ended up doing 6 year studies English. And so we used to have lessons down the pub, sometimes me and my teacher, right? You can't do that anymore, obviously. In those days when I was a lad, you could still do that. And he said to me, whatever you do not study English at university. You'll end up teaching snotty-nosed kids like yourself in some school somewhere. And so I didn't. And then I wasted 20 years of my life doing something that I really didn't enjoy.
And
now I do a podcast with Vaseem.
What about you, Vaseem?
You redeemed yourself. Well, no, firstly, I wanted to be an international cricketer. There's just one small problem with that, which is that I'm fairly shit at cricket. According to Abir, anyway.
No, I was going to say, because you've got a frozen shoulder at the moment, haven't you? That's your
It's improved a lot. I might be making a comeback very, very shortly. Anyway, the dream hasn't died. I still play cricket every weekend in the summer. So, I'm waiting for that little knock on the door, England call up. But in the meantime, I did want to be a writer. I wrote my first novel aged 17. I'd started reading Terry Pratchett's Discworld, and I thought, you know what, this looks really easy. Of course, Pratchett just made it look easy. So I wrote a really rubbish comic sci-fi fantasy, and I actually finished it and sent it in to some agents aged 17. And I kid you not, I honestly believed that I would get a big publishing deal, and I wouldn't have to go to university, and I'd be, a rich and famous writer. That just shows you how stupid 17-year-olds are.
Oh, I was going to say, when did reality hit?
Yeah, exactly. Well, 23 years later.
There's it.
7 books.
What about you guys? Did you always want to be writers?
Tariq?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I did anyway. I mean, it was definitely, I definitely wanted to write from a young age, and wrote loads of crappy wee short stories and notebooks and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was definitely something I wanted to do for ages.
Yeah, it's same here. I mean, I loved like the movies and all this sort of stuff. So I used to make really crap homemade films. And I remember it was after playing some sort of crap game on the Atari ST that I wrote a little book that I got Dad to take into his work and photocopy that I then made my friends pay me money for at school when it was in about primary 6 or something.
You were the first to get published.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Talking of film, Marco, what I used to do is I used to go down the car boot sales and get the pirate videotapes of the latest films. And I used to hire them out to my...
Nice, yeah.
So not only is that illegal...
Red Heat was a big seller. Red Heat with Arnold Schwarzenegger. That was a big seller because of all the naughty bits in them.
But it's not the same with the parrot and the eye patch on his shoulder, though, is it, Vas? That pirate. Sorry, that's another very lame joke.
I see.
So what was the path then? You both wanted to be writers, and how did you guys then find your agents, etc.?
Why don't you go first, Vas?
Well, so I lived in India for a decade. So, I like Abir, I went into finance. I was a management consultant, and I spent 10 years of that in India and a bit in China. Then I came back to the UK, and because I knew I wouldn't go back to India, which was quite sad for me because it was some of the best years of my life, I decided to write a book set there. I decided to write a crime novel because I love crime fiction, and that was my first book, The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopper. I never expected it to be published after 23 years of being rejected by pretty much every single agent in the country. I mean, Abir's heard me say this before, but I've been rejected more times than Jennifer Aniston. So, you know.
That's harsh on Aniston. That's really.
She knows I love her. She knows I love her. So yeah, it was a surprise to me. I got a 4-book deal. I sent it out to a handful of agents, and A.M. Heath, an agent from A.M. Heath, Ewan Thornycroft, he sent it to me. He gave me the representation, and then he got a 4-book deal out of Hodder. And if your listeners are really wondering why, I suppose because it was just a bit different. I mean, that's what my editor said. They liked the way it was written. They liked the fact that it was colourful and it was set in India, this modern, vibrant country, which everybody wants to know a bit more about and thinks they know a lot about. But of course, India is a lot darker place than we often give it credit for, because we're so beguiled by Bollywood and Slumdog Millionaire and, you know, the best exotic marigold hotel where everybody is dancing in the streets and it's always a happy ending, but it's not really like that in India. So my books, that series, it's an attempt to shine a light on the India that I experienced personally while I was living there.
What about you, Abir?
Before that, Vas, you said it was colourful and that's why they liked it. Was that because you did it in crayon?
Or just the cover?
So for me, as I said, you know, I spent 20 years doing the wrong thing. I went into finance. Vas and I were actually at university together, except I did a proper degree. Vas, your degrees, when they ran out of toilet roll in the toilets, they use those, wouldn't we?
Well, the odd thing is, just to add to that, we were there at the same time, but we never met. We were both doing finance and economics, and we never met. And what's even odder is that I was published a year before him, and then he was published. And I was invited to the New Blood panel at Harrogate, which was part of the Harrogate festivities. It wasn't at Harrogate; it was in London.
Are you going to lie here? You're going to tell?
I'm not going to lie. I went along to this New Blood panel because I thought, you know what, solidarity. There's another brown Asian crime author.
You didn't know. Firstly,
I went there. This guy, he wouldn't talk to me all evening. He just completely.
You know what? I've got. Firstly, this is a pack of lies, right? One, Vaseem didn't know that there weren't going to be any other Asians there that night. 2, I wasn't even published, right? So he didn't know who I was. He was off chatting to Mark Billingham, right? I was sitting in one corner by myself drinking milk, right? He was off swanning around.
Why were you drinking milk?
No, well, I was just drinking it before Vas got to it. That's what Vas drinks. Anyway, to answer your question, before Vaseem rudely interrupted me, so I, as I said, I mean, I was in finance for 20 years. And I got to the age of 39 3/4, and I really thought, I don't want to do this anymore. If I don't change now, I'll never do what I wanted to. And you know, in the past, I'd started writing stuff. I'd write like a chapter of something, and then I'd make the mistake of reading it, and I would lose all confidence, and I think this is rubbish, and I'd put it in a drawer. Or you know what it's like? Life gets in the way. You'll start something, but then your job or your family or something will come up, and you just won't keep going. And so that happened to me several times. I'd never submitted anything. And then I finally did. And then I saw something on Breakfast TV. I saw Lee Child on Breakfast TV, basically saying how at the age of 40, he'd lost his job. And he started writing. And I'd never read any of his works until then. So I picked up the first in the series, Killing Floor, and I read it in 2 days. And a bit like Vas, I looked at it, and because it seems very simply written. It's only now, many years later, that I realized you've got to be really talented to write in such a style. But at the time, it gave me a bit of confidence, and I thought, well, let me give it a shot. So I started writing, and I had this idea for sending this British detective to India after the First World War, because you know, part of what I was wanting to do was to look at that period in history, because we forget about it. We don't talk about colonial history. And I wrote about 10,000 words of this. And then I made the mistake of reading it again and realizing it was rubbish. And I put it in a drawer. But then I saw a competition in the Telegraph. Penguin Random House were looking for new crime writers. And all they wanted was the first 5,000 words of a novel and a 2-page synopsis. And that appealed to me because I'm naturally lazy and I'd done the work. So I basically tidied it up, the first 5,000, wrote a 2-page synopsis. I spent a week on the synopsis and a week tidying up. I did put effort into that. And then I sent it away. And then I didn't hear anything for 3 months. I was hoping, you know, I'll get some sort of feedback. But then after about 3 months, just out of the blue, I was at work and I got an email saying, "Congratulations, you've won, and we're going to publish your novel." Except A, I didn't have a novel. I had these 10,000 words in a drawer. And B, I reacted the way anybody from Glasgow reacts when you're faced with good news. I started swearing my head off, and my colleagues thought I was having a heart attack. And I'm like, no, it's good news. And, one of the judges happened to be an agent, and he sent me an email saying, "I'd love to represent you. Come and see me." So I did. I went to see him that week, and he said, "Look," and I got there, and Hanif Qureshi was in reception in his jogging pants and carrying a Tesco bag, and I just had to pinch myself because I just thought, this is surreal. But he offered me.
You thought he published Sainsbury's, right?
Sorry. And that was the beginning of my series. I just got very, very lucky, and what I would say is, you should try every opportunity, try every channel you can, because sometimes you get lucky.
But those are two very different paths, obviously. I mean, Vaseem, you have went through that whole thing of sending books in and getting rejections and stuff like that. What was it that made you keep going at that point? Because that's, that it personally, speaking personally, it is very deflating when you get rejection. What keeps you going at that point?
Incredibly deflating, because in the old days as well, it wasn't easy because you didn't have email, so you had to physically print out. I used to print out something like 25 sets of 3 chapters with a synopsis and send it out to a blanket bomb 25 or 30 different agents, and then you sit back and you think, surely one out of these 30 people will like what I sent in, and then you get 30 odd letters back. So it's incredibly soul destroying. I suppose what happens is that you pick yourself up after you've had a year, maybe a few months off. You pick yourself up off the floor and you say, well, I'm writing because I love doing it, and it really gives me more joy than pretty much anything else. So you carry on. And I
think, just to add to that, a lot of the time it's just what you're writing might not fit a particular box at a certain time with an agent. It's not a reflection on the standard of your work or your talent. I mean, as Vas said, 30 rejections, and now the man's got 6 books and more awards than you can shake a stick at. So you shouldn't take it as anything other than, right, it's one step back, but I can keep going.
I will add one thing to that, Marco. So one of the things that happened over the course of those 20 years is that the first 3 or 4 books were, the responses were, go jump off a cliff, go throw yourself, throw yourself in the sea, never write again. But towards the 5th book, perhaps, I started to get a few agents who were kind enough to write back and say, look, we like the way you're writing. This just doesn't fit our list. Send us the next thing that you've written. And I think this goes for anything, for people who are listening, who are, on that journey. You will improve over the years if you keep at it every single day. If you take a few years off and you literally don't do anything, then you can't really improve. So the first thing is that you've got to keep at it every single day, because in spite of what Abir's just said, just to play schoolmaster for a second, there is a certain level, a minimum level of prose quality that experienced agents and editors expect for anything that is publishable. And a lot of the material that they're sent simply doesn't meet that minimum requirement, which means it just gets binned straight away. It doesn't matter how good the idea is, it's just not publishable in terms of the written quality. And that just comes with practice and experience.
You're harsh, aren't you? You are harsh. This is what he does to all of us. We've got a WhatsApp group of writers, and he just slaps us verbally constantly.
It's tough love.
You know what? We need it sometimes. But what I would say is we're still improving. I would hope that the books we're writing now are better than the ones that we wrote 5 years ago. I'll be honest with you, I can't read my first book. I cringe. I can't read any of Vaseem's work.
Well, you say that, but both of your first books found a lot of success. Vaseem, you got the Waterston's Book Club, Waterston's Paperback of the Year, Telegraph Pick of the Week, and Abir, you got the Endeavour Dagger from the Crime Writers Association. So you both got some good buzz from that first book. That must have been really encouraging. And you've continued to win awards ever since then.
No, yeah, do you know what? It's great that there is something wonderful about your first book being published. When the first one comes out, you do tend to get a wee bit more publicity for your first than you do for your second or your third. And also, I think at the time that Vass and I were published, there were very few sort of non-white crime authors in the UK, and our subject matter was different. It was refreshing. It was still British crime fiction, but it was from a different angle, and I think a lot of people liked that. So I think we were lucky in when we came in. Well, I certainly was. I'm not taking any credit away from Vass, because Vass's writing is great, but I feel I was very, very lucky in terms of right time and right place.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking at all of this stuff. So if I might just mention a little plug for, I've just finished recording a crime writing course for Curtis Brown. Curtis Brown.
Oh yeah.
Creative. They've had some really big authors come out of there. Jane Harper, who came out of there recently, and so they've just asked. I've just finished recording the material for a writing crime fiction course, which will come out in October. And one of the things that I was forced to do for the 6 odd modules is to reflect over this very long period of being not published and then being published. And the 6 or 7 years that I've now been published, and Abir and I talk about this all of the time, you begin to realize the idiosyncrasies of the publishing industry. So, as he just said, they throw tons of money at debuts, usually, or at least tons of publicity at debuts, because everyone's looking for the next big thing. And then the established big best-selling authors, they always get a load of publicity. But the ones in the middle, who are on book 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, they don't get so much as much love. So it becomes a much harder journey, unless you've managed to somehow capture enough of an audience with your first book. And that might be nothing to do with you. It might simply be luck, as Abir said. It might be the advertising budget that's been put behind you by your publisher, or the right circumstances at the right time. But if you can just get that little platform and the foot in the door, then what most publishers will do is they will try and grow your career. And that's the important thing, that if you can slowly grow your career and keep improving the offerings that you're putting out there, I think then you're onto a career that will last. And the truth is that we all know lots of authors who perhaps haven't had that luck, that little bit of luck with the first book, and their careers tailed off very abruptly, and either it's finished or they've had to think up something new. And a lot of authors do reinvent themselves and do something new. So it's not the end of the journey even then.
But would you say it's slightly easier with a series? Because both you and I have written series as our first couple of books.
Well, let me ask these chaps. I mean, they're writers and readers and podcasters. What would you say?
Well, I think if you're picking up a debut author and you like the book, then you're more likely to go back for the second book. If it is a series, I would say that definitely helps, especially in a genre like crime. I think I think if you establish a character that people enjoy, then they're always going to come back for that sort of character. So I definitely think that makes a difference. But I also think, especially from speaking to other guests on the podcast as well, that there seems to be, I mean, I think it's a pressure that's always been there on writers, but now more than ever with social media and stuff, that there's a huge expectation on writers themselves to effectively be their own marketing department a lot of the time. Is that something that you've found as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean, we were both lucky. I mean, my first book, they stuck me on BBC Breakfast on the Red Sofa, and that gave it a really good boost. They did a lot of other stuff. They put some ads on the Underground, etc., etc. So I was incredibly fortunate in that sense. But after that, we've had to do a lot of the running. I mean, one of the reasons of us setting up the podcast is, one, because we wanted to say some things about the industry, and there weren't that many people of our background doing creative writing podcasts or literary podcasts. But also, we also feel that it's a good way to keep ourselves visible, and then all sorts of other things. I do blog posts and so many things that you are expected to do now.
I think that in itself can be it can be a barrier to some people, because writers, it's stereotypical to say it, but a lot of them are introverted. They don't want to engage in that sort of side of it. Many aren't, but a lot are, and to then have to create a social media presence where you're engaging with people all the time and all this sort of stuff it can put an extra pressure on top of actually writing a book. It can stop some people, I think.
Absolutely, Marco. I mean, it is. I mean, people expect you to do social media, at least. And social media only gets you so far. Having said that, there are writers who've made it without. I mean, Mick Herron, who's a fantastic writer, he has very little social media presence. He's never done. Until lockdown, he didn't even have a computer in his house. He'd go to the library once a day. So yeah, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it definitely makes a difference in this day and age. But as Vaseem said, there's a limit to what you can do, and there's a whole different dimension which a publisher brings with, in terms of interviews in newspapers, TV, radio, all of that stuff. The big ticket stuff is very difficult to do. You can build a social media presence, but there is part of the market there, and probably a significant part, given the way that the audience of crime fiction skews older, that still pick up their recommendations from reviews in newspapers or on the telly or on the radio. So there's no easy option these days. It's probably getting harder.
I think it can definitely, if I suppose it works the other way, in the sense that if you are good at it, there are writers that I wouldn't have read, didn't know about even, but because Twitter has this community and you look for writers and you see people following other writers and you start following them and they constantly are on there giving out advice, seem friendly and all this sort of stuff, you start to think, oh, they seem like a good guy, I'll pick up their book. So it can work, but I think that's perhaps more the exception than the rule a lot of the time, I think.
Well, I bet it has the opposite effect.
Exactly.
Every
I didn't want to say anything, but
every time I tweet, somebody burns one of my books.
You were going to say something, Tariq?
You can say that the avenues that I see books being successful in, I find are quite odd sometimes. Like supermarkets are such a massive boost for writers, and yet we've said this before, Marco, I can't imagine one time I've ever actually bought a book at a supermarket. But it seems to be, obviously it's something to do with advertising, or it's just the fact that it's presence on a shelf. And there seems to be so many old-fashioned and newfangled ways of advertising and pushing books out that it's quite a complicated market now, more than ever was, I think, in terms of trying to get your book out there and visible in front of people.
Just picking up on the point of supermarkets, it seems to be that it's a different demographic that buy their books.
Yeah, so I think it must be.
I would imagine that the both of you're buying your books either going into a bookshop or possibly online. Now, there's another part of the social spectrum that will go into supermarket to do their weekly shop. They'll pass an aisle and they'll have an impulse purchase because they'll see something by an author that they like, and they may not go into bookshops normally. So, and bookshops supermarkets do make up huge volumes in terms of sales for certain authors. But what you find, and what's happening more and more, is that the range of offering that you'll find in the supermarket is becoming extremely limited. Their philosophy is, we will only we'll buy cheap and sell a lot. And if you're not already in that bracket of being a multi-million seller, we probably won't stock you. So, if you're, and this is a point that we make, if you're sitting in the Isle of Skye, or you're sitting in the Isle of Dogs in London, very, very different demographics. You probably still get the same 20 books on the shelf in a supermarket that you will in both places. So supermarkets is a difficult one. It definitely makes a difference. But it makes a difference. You need to break in before you'll be stopped most of the time.
And what about obviously both of you've already alluded to the fact that the settings of your crime stories are unusual compared to perhaps the majority of things, which is a unique thing, and it can draw readers in, and obviously it works for you guys. But does that bring its own pressures in some way, in terms of do you have to spend a lot of time researching in a way that you might not if you were writing, your bog standard crime fiction, I guess?
Vas?
Yeah, well, we both write historical crime fiction at the moment, so we've talked about this endlessly between ourselves. And I write a series, my current series, the Malabar House series, which is set just after partition and Indian independence in 1947. So the first book, Midnight at Malabar House, starts in 1950. Now, for me, like for Abir, there was a reason that I wanted to explore that particular period. I lived in Mumbai and I wanted to go back to when it was still Bombay. And I also wanted to look at the roots of modern India. A lot of those roots were established just after independence, because after 300 years of British presence, India was given back the reins and had to decide what kind of democracy it was going to be, what kind of country, what kind of direction it was going to move in. And it was quite a turbulent period. So for me, it was the backdrop that was the most important thing. And that, of course, requires a lot of research. And then the trick, as Abir and I are constantly saying, is to know what to leave out so that you don't bog down your crime story or give your characters too much of a burden to carry, when really what they're really supposed to be carrying is the crime narrative.
Yeah, totally.
See, I've gone the other way. Vaseem won the Dagger for his best historical novel this year, and I decided that's it. No point in me writing any more historical stuff. Not for now. So what I'm writing now is modern day stuff. Just looking at the research, it is different. I mean, there's less research done in libraries. There's more research done online. The book that I'm writing at the moment is set in the US, like yours, Tariq. So that entails a very different form of research. There's a lot more cultural research involved there compared to the sort of cultural research that you have to do when you come from a culture. So it's different. I wouldn't say there's any more, but it's definitely a different form of research that's required. And as Vaseem says, quite often the battle is deciding what to keep out. So for me, I spent 3 days researching the Calcutta sewer system. And because I'd done that research, I had to show everyone how smart I was. I had to put it all in the book. And of course, my editor just scrubbed it all out. It doesn't move the plot forward, and nobody cares.
I think that's the rule of thumb, isn't it? If you write a particular scene, and then you go back to it after a couple of days and you read that scene, and by the end of that scene, you're feeling as if you're wading through information rather than the scene moving forward, then it's a good bet that you've got too much information.
I mean, some guests we've had on that have written historical fiction that always come back to this thing of authenticity against accuracy. Yeah. So you can write something as perfectly as happened, but it may not. It might be very dry, and it's more important to try and get the feel of the period in place.
Honestly, you do not need to get everything right. I mean, we've both had people write to us about minor corrections. I mean, one guy wrote to me. He read the book and he said, "Yeah, I really enjoyed this book." He went through it in long-winded detail about everything he liked, and then he got to his true reason for writing. He said, "However, on page 82, you mentioned Perseus's jeep." So Perseus is the female police officer who's the main protagonist of the Malabar House series. And he said, "But you've given your jeep windows when it's obvious that jeep did not have windows."
That was one of the best emails I ever wrote.
He was right. I'll give him that. I checked it myself afterwards, and he was right.
But it's so true, though. I mean, you're not writing or reading a factual novel. It's not about, you're not sitting there saying, "I want to learn what it was like in India in that point in time." I've always looked at it like a kind of Robert Harris thing. I read it and it's set in Pompeii or ancient Rome or whatever, and I want to get a flavour of what the time was like. I want to get enough facts and details that I feel like it's real and it's authentic, and I maybe will learn something that I didn't know before, and that's great. But ultimately, I also just want to have a really good, fast-paced story that draws me along. And if I want to learn more about it, then I'll go and read something else.
Here's the lie at the heart of all of historical fiction, which is basically you've got a person, a protagonist who's out of time. You mentioned probably the most the archetypal case. Robert Harris's Pompeii. The guy speaks like a modern person. He does a modern job.
Yeah.
So he's reflecting our own sensibilities back at us. And that's what our characters do. Vaseem's character and my characters, they speak in somewhere between the English of the time and the English of today, enough to give you a feel for it, but not enough to take you out of that bubble that you're creating for the reader.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I suppose historical fiction in that sense is no different than, a piece of science fiction or something. You're viewing it through a lens, and you're wanting to tell a story that can reflect aspects of society now, but in whatever time period you're wanting to set it in, or at least a lot of the time. I think the best ones do that.
Absolutely, you're writing for an audience today,
mm-hmm.
And your characters and your stories reflect that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what about your writing styles in terms of, do you plan a lot, or do you is it a lot of pantsing? What's your style?
Go on, Vas. Vas has written 6,000 words before you woke up this morning. Every morning.
He's not kidding. No, I do plan a lot because I have to be quite organized, because I still like doing my day job, although it's very flexible now. I work at a university. It's a crime research centre, so it's quite useful as well to be there. And I, of course, still have aspirations to play cricket for England, so I play my summer weekend. So I have to be quite organised. So I do tend to get up, I write, I plan the novels meticulously, so that by the time I take about 3 or 4 months doing the research and the planning, and I write out every scene in short form, so that before I write the first words, I know exactly where I'm going. And because I've done that, it means that I can easily write 1,000 words early in the morning and then knock off for the day and do whatever else I want to do.
Yeah, nobody likes you very much.
I do. I have to admit, I do. Once I finish at around about 6:37, 8 in the morning, I do send the WhatsApp group a message saying, get up, you lazy gits, I've already written 1,000 words.
The fact you finish writing at 6:30, 7 in the morning, I mean, what time do you start?
I'm an insomniac, so I get up at about 5, 6. Sometimes I'll be up at 6 and I'll finish by 7:30 or 8.
I mean, that's the dream. And then you've got the whole day just to
send text messages, how brilliant he is, how organised he is.
I'm just encouraging you guys. Come on.
Yeah, my style is slightly different. So I will basically, I wouldn't do anything before the kids are out the door. That's the first thing. So, and then it's about finding where they've left the computer for the night. Things like that. In terms of planning, I tried to pants it for the 4th book, and it just went wrong. And so I had to go back. But I tend to do a skeleton. So I'll write a 2 or 3 page skeleton of what I think is going to happen. And then I'll try and flesh out the first third of that in a wee bit more detail, maybe another 5, 6 pages. And then I'll get bored and I'll have to actually start writing. So that's how I tend to do it. I'll have an idea of the start and I'll have an idea of the finish and the main action points. But a lot of that might change. But then I'll sketch out a third of it, and then I'll write that third, and that'll give me more idea of what the next third will look like, and so on until we get to the end. And it may have no real, the book may have no resemblance to what I'd initially expected it to look like, except the start point and the end point are probably pretty similar. Not always. I mean, for the 3rd book, it turned out that somebody I expected to die ended up being quite, a villainous character in the end who didn't, he was behind everything. So my style's not quite as regimented and certainly not as efficient as Vast is.
When you're writing a series, do you plan more than one book in advance at all?
Vaseem's probably planned the next 20 years.
Well, I had to submit 3 synopses for the 3-book deal for this particular series, the initial deal. So in that sense, yes. I mean, if I might be permitted a plug for my current book, the ones that's just come out last week.
Is that permitted? I don't think it is.
We'll cut this bit out.
So it's with every second book in a series, there's always that fear that if the first book has been reasonably successful, and as Abir mentioned, Midnight at Malabar House has won the historical dagger.
Did I mention that?
Just this year. You were kind enough to mention that.
I'm glad you mentioned it as well. Though.
I have to pay you afterwards, I know. But,
what award was it? Just remind us, because I missed that bit.
Anyway, we're being serious now because we're passing on a lesson while pushing my book. So The Dying Day, which is the 2nd book in the series. So with that one, it did take a bit longer, I have to admit, because I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to replicate the enthusiasm that I had brought to the first book in the series. And I think that probably is true for most people writing second books in a series. But the plot that I decided to go with was one that had been with me, growing inside me for maybe 20 odd years from when I lived in India. So it's a 600-year-old copy of Dante's The Divine Comedy goes missing from Bombay's Asiatic Society, and it's a real artifact that actually exists there in India. And Persis, my lead character, is called in to investigate, and then there's a series of coded riddles that she has to follow. So I suppose the lesson here is that you can borrow from other writings in the crime genre. So, I mean, I purposely was inspired for this particular book by the Da Vinci Code, and I'm a fan, and I know Abir is perhaps a little bit more.
I'm impressed that you stole it with such abandon.
Well, Dan Brown hasn't sued me yet. So.
No. He hasn't got my email yet. Just give him a week.
No, I think personally, I think that the crime fiction genre is so broad. It's so broad, and there are so many corners and nooks and crannies where you can tuck your particular idea into, so that in some ways it reflects some of the stuff that's gone before, but then you make it your own, and hopefully you find a market for it.
I should say I'm reading The Dying Day right now, and it's brilliant. It really is. It pains me to say that, but it's true. Just from my angle, I never plan a book before it's time to write it, because my books generally they have to reflect whatever's annoying me at that particular time. So all of the books are essentially allegorical. They talk about things that are upsetting me or things that I want to put right in the world. So the fourth book, Death in the East, it was written just after Brexit, and it's as much about British society and our attitude towards immigrants as it is a series set in India. Half of the book is set in the East End of London in 1905, in the Jewish East End, because I wanted to reflect my thoughts about what was happening in Britain when I was writing it. The fifth one, which is coming out in November, a lot of it deals with Hindu-Muslim violence, but really it's my stab at what's happening in India at the moment with this Hindu nationalism. So whatever I'm writing, I mean, I want to do the series all the way to 1947, and right now I'm at 1923 or 24, right? And I'm from Glasgow, so my life expectancy is limited, right? So but I don't know what's going to happen. I've got some themes that I know I want my characters to deal with, and there'll be some historical incidents that I will want to talk about, like the Salt March, Gandhi's Salt March, and other things like that. But the actual plot of the novel, I will not know until I come to write it, because it will be dealing with whatever is bugging me about the world as it is today.
And you want to tell us the name of them, since Vaseem's plugged his book?
It's called The Shadows of Men, and that's out in November. Thank you, Marco. That was really kind of you for that. I don't like sort of,
We should also mention, of course, that A Death in the East is being shortlisted for the Theakston Crime Novel of the Year, which is being announced on the 22nd of July. So next week, 22nd of July. Are you excited?
I am nervous. I don't think I'm going to win. There's some phenomenal books on that shortlist, including...
nonsense. You've got as much chance as anyone else.
I don't know. There's some really good books on that shortlist. So yeah, it'd be lovely. It'd be lovely to win. It'd be very nice. I feel a wee bit like Ivan Lendl at Wimbledon, because I've been shortlisted. This is the third shortlist, and I tend to go and just clap as somebody else. I think they know I'm a reliable clapper.
You better not say that where Ivan Lendl can actually hear you, because he had a reputation.
Oh, said the man slagged off Jennifer Aniston. You're trying.
Yeah, but she looks like she can take a joke. Ivan Lendl looks like he can take a joke.
I think you've ruled out 2 guests on your podcast already.
Or have we? You say that. But, right of reply, Ivan. If you're out there, I feel your pain. Come on the show.
But just going back to the process thing, I mean, you've told us how you'll get your drafts done, but are either of you people that will revise as you go and have a pretty clean first draft that you're happy to send out at that point?
Don't get him started. He's just, what do you think to reply to that?
Yes, is the answer, Mark. Yes is the answer. I absolutely hate having to do revisions afterwards, and I hate being asked by my editor to do revisions. So I really, really go to town on editing as I go, with every day, every chapter, every scene, so that by the time I send something into the editor, it really doesn't come back with many edits after that.
But do you do that? So when you sit down to write, do you like review what you've written the day before, or is
Absolutely.
that? Yeah, that's what you do. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it won't come as any surprise that I don't do that at all. I think partly is because I don't really have any confidence in myself. And, you know, if I read what I wrote the previous day, I'm just like, right, putting this in the bin, putting that in the bin. I don't know. So I will write the whole thing, or I'll write as much of it as I can, and then I will edit it. I will read it through and I'll edit it before I send it to my editor. And with the Wyndham series, as I've been going along, you know, the edits that I get back have been less and less. I remember the first lot of edits I got my first book, it was just covered in red ink. And I just wanted to jump in the I should point out that, you know, I've just had my edits back for this standalone thriller, this American one, and it's very much like that first book. It's covered in red ink, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. But it's a learning experience. That's how you've got to look at it. And I feel like I'm back at a stage similar to where I was when I was writing that first book. I'm writing something completely different, and I'm learning. You know, when this is finished, I would say that I would hope that this is the best thing that I've been able to write to date, because I've got fantastic editors who are guiding me, and you know, I'm learning all the time. And I would hope that even now, even with all the red ink, I would hope it's a better first draft than what I wrote 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Having said that, it does feel a wee bit soul destroying when you put everything into something and it comes back and they're like, wow, do you know what? How about we change the central premise of the book?
Well, how do you deal with the notes then? You know, because you get these notes back and you think, is it a case of, we've chatted before, we said the best thing to do is just you put it in a drawer for 2-3 days. You go back to it. At first, you think, nah, that's all crap. And then as time goes on, you say, oh, I'll accept that. And then suddenly you're agreeing with everything.
Well, the way you're right in terms of I've always agreed with 99% of what my editors tell me, because they know what they're doing and I'm just an idiot from Hamilton, right? So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is when I was hit by these huge amounts of edits and you don't know where to start, I sort of reverted to my finance training. I responded with a PowerPoint presentation. My editor at the time just went, nobody's ever done that before. Nobody's come back with a PowerPoint presentation. But that was my way of working through it, of taking this, you know, this great punch to the face and breaking it down into smaller chunks that I could deal with. Mm-hmm. So it's about what works for you, I think. If you get that situation, break it down in a way that you're comfortable with. And for me, that was just going back to my training as an accountant, basically, in terms of dealing with a document and breaking it down and responding to each point. And of course, Vaseem never gets edits like that. So.
No, I don't.
Well, I was
kidding. Of course, I get notes. I get notes. They're not extensive, and the reason is not less to do with me than the fact that before I begin the novel, I tend to write a reasonably comprehensive synopsis, and then I'll pass it back and forth a bit, so we have some agreement over where the plot is going overall. Because the worst thing for me is to write 70,000 words and then find that, you know, the ending doesn't quite work because nobody likes it. Nobody will agree with how it's going to pan out. So I'd rather have most of that in place beforehand.
And I think there may be a difference in answer to this one as well, but do you ever get to that point in a novel where you're sort of stuck and not sure where to go next?
Because I've spent 3 or 4 months planning and I planned out every single scene, it doesn't usually happen in that way. It might happen during the planning phase, where, you know, you're wrestling with a particular idea and you just can't get it. You just can't get the trick. Because with crime novels, the most important thing to realize is that there's got to be these multiple layers of mystery throughout the novel, not just the big mystery of who committed the murder. If you know, most crime novels do involve a murder, but the little things like where you've seeded the clues. What's the mystery behind this clue? How are you going to resolve it? Is it going to be a red herring? And sometimes you can get bogged down in those smaller details rather than the bigger one, because the bigger one will be quite clear from the very beginning. You know who committed the crime. You know why they committed the crime. And generally that doesn't tend to change. unless you have a brainwave halfway through writing your novel. But yeah, I do sometimes get stuck on those little points because I want them to be surprising, but also they have to make logical sense within the overall structure of your plot.
How do you balance?
Sorry, Tariq.
No, I would just ask a quick question of how do you balance all that future planning with not getting bored when you actually come to write it? Because that's what I'd be worried about, was that I would suck all the fun out.
Well, I find that I do a lot of the yeah, I'm a person who never has any fun.
You know what? That's so true.
No, I love the
therapy. He should be paying you for therapy.
Look, I find the act of writing itself to be fun, and I'm always enthusiastic about writing. I'm never ever sad. I don't really get it when writers get really mopey and down on the whole act of writing, even if you're not quite published or if things are not going so well. The only purpose and reason for sitting down in front of your laptop to write is because you are at that moment in time feeling really good about writing and enthusiastic and hopeful for what might happen on the page once you start getting your brain into gear.
Yeah, what I would say is, right, if you're ever feeling down, don't go to Vaseem for a pick-me-up, because he'll slap you. You'll get a verbal slap from him.
Only to tell you to be enthusiastic, to just to have fun with.
What's wrong with you? Just get a grip. Just write the thing.
Tough love.
A great quote. I read a lot of literary fiction, and one of my favorite literary authors is called John Irving, and he wrote Hotel New Hampshire, Cider House Rules, etc., etc. And when he was a younger writer, and down in the dumps because he wasn't getting anywhere with his writing, and it's all he ever wanted to do. Yeah. Well, he weirdly met one of his idols, not me, but he met one of his writing idols at a workshop or something, and he told him about his problem, and he said, "Look, I'm thinking of packing it all in." And the writer said to him, "Look, what you've got to do is stop saying to yourself that one day you will become a writer. Wake up each morning and say you are a writer. You may not be published, you may not be successful yet, but you are a writer because you are acting as a writer. You're doing the things that writers do. You're coming up with ideas and you're putting them on paper, and you're enjoying yourself, well, for the most part, while doing it."
Yeah, totally.
Vaseem is right. And, it doesn't matter. We're all on this journey because we all want to write. None of us are the finished article. Vaseem's probably closer to it than anybody. But seriously, we're all on this journey. We're just at different stages on the route. That's it.
But do you ever get that moment of being stuck?
For me, it's different. I mean, I take on board what Vas says about it's the smaller things. For me, half the fun is putting people or my characters in difficult situations, and then trying to figure out how to get them out of it. Because if that's where the hooks are, that's what's going to turn the pages. The way I describe it, it's like trying to do 3 jigsaws at once, and you've got the pieces of all 3 jigsaws in one box. So it's about moving the pieces about and trying to make them fit. And if they don't fit in that particular puzzle, move over to another storyline or whatever. So not every piece that you think of will fit into the narrative that you're writing. And then you've got to find another piece that does. It's kind of weird. It's like, so for example, let's say my protagonist needs a car, right? They haven't got a car. How are they going to get a car? Well, they're going to steal a car. How are they going to steal a car? Well, they're not going to break a window because that's what everybody does. They're not going to hotwire it. Let's think of a different way. What if he worked a garage 10 years ago or whatever? What if there's an impound lot? How do we break into that impound lot? What do we need to do to get out without anybody realizing the car's been stolen? All of these things are the problems that I like playing with and coming up with new ideas. It's part of the plot, but it's a very minor part of the plot, but it still needs to be refreshing. It still needs to be interesting. So that's where I often get stuck, in the sense that there won't be an immediate answer to it. It's something that you play around. You try 3 or 4 different ways of getting out of that, and you choose the way that works best.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying about this sort of small things. You can have the overall idea and plot sort of in your head and worked out, but yeah, I'm very bad for sort of getting hung up on some small details sometimes, and you can kind of get stuck in that little bit going round and round.
What do you do when you switch off? Do you go for a walk? Or do you do the dishes? Do you do the garden?
Well, I normally write in the evening, so normally what I would do in that situation is sit there, try and work out what to do, get frustrated and go to bed, and then sometimes I'll wake up the next day and it'll hit me the next morning or whatever.
But if it doesn't work, go for a walk. Go rake leaves. It's when your brain's doing something else.
Yeah.
Play cricket. Get out for zero like me. Throw the bat at your friend.
Yeah, you could try that.
There's a dog now in your household, Marco, so you could take the dog out for
that's true.
2 a.m. walk.
But your dog's writing your novel.
yeah.
You send him around my house.
Instead, the man who has an elephant write his novels. God. Can you tell them the story about why you stopped? Well, you haven't stopped, but why you're less keen on writing the stories with the elephant in it.
What's the answer?
Well, he's probably forgotten, but basically he realised that having an elephant in all your scenes isn't very good logistically. Do you not have to go up an escalator at some point in a shopping mall?
Oh, yeah. It's only a baby elephant.
This elephant, and people expect this elephant, and I've got to put this elephant in situations where an elephant wouldn't.
Yeah, you're talking about the first series, yeah. Yeah, that elephant still gets me. I get so much mail from around the world about that damn baby elephant. I mean, it was only supposed to be. It's only a symbol. I mean, it doesn't talk or fly or solve the crimes. It's just that the
main up in a shopping mall.
Well, the main character is so grim and rigid and honest that I needed to alleviate his grimness by giving him the responsibility of looking after this little elephant that he's inherited. But anyway, yeah, I still get loads of mail about that elephant. People, when he's making a comeback. But at the moment, I'm doing the historical series now, so it's not likely soon.
And you guys also have your podcast, Red Hot Chilli Writers, as you mentioned before, and you've had some pretty big guests in that. Chris Whittaker, Val McDermott, Dean Koontz, Richard Osman. What's your secret to getting these big guys on?
We've got big guests on, Tariq.
Oh, we've got great guests. This is probably the biggest guest we've had on so far, I suppose.
What sort of a question is that?
Marco rescued that one.
Neither of us felt insulted till Marco pointed it out.
It's very simple. We just guilt them into it. I mean, we're two brown authors. We prey on that white guilt.
Yeah, pretty much what it is.
We're going to turn us down, seriously, in the current climate.
If you don't come on, people will call you a racist. No, that didn't happen. I should say he was a
You face your mural.
Yes, we've just been lucky. I mean, we've been going a couple of years now, and I think it's a wee bit different. Is the first thing, and we should say that Vas and I are the hosts, but we have a team of 4 or 5 other writers who come on regularly: Imran Mahmood, A. Dand, Alex Khan, Aisha Malik. So we have a core team. It's just that Vas organises everything, and I'm the closest one geographically to him. So that's why we end up hosting it. But
I think the answer is that it grew slowly. So we started off with not the Richard Osmans or Val.
No, but to be fair, we started with big authors.
Actually, no, we did. Sorry, didn't we? Sorry, I've got that wrong. You cut that crap out. We started with a good friend of ours, Anne Cleves, and then Ruth Ware, and then Claire McIntosh. So we started off with a bang, and then I think what happened was that gradually with our podcast. I mean, yours is very specifically about the craft of writing, and you do it wonderfully. Ours is a little bit irreverent in the sense that we're looking at issues of diversity in the industry, but we're not standing on a soapbox and screaming about it. We're just bringing in lots of these guests who are, as you've noticed, a lot of them are white authors. We're not necessarily picking authors of color all the time, and we're having fun with them. We do quizzes. We did a quiz with Richard Osman, for instance.
I always win the quiz.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've also been lucky in terms of lockdown, because lockdown has sort of changed the way people advertise or have closed the options down. So we're getting authors who maybe wouldn't have come on before because they were doing book tours or whatever. Now everything's online, and so I think we've benefited from that. We've also benefited from the fact that we can just call up some of our mates now. And that's the great thing about the crime fiction writing fraternity. Everybody is really genuine and nice. There's so many people who will help you out, who don't need to give you the time of day, but will go out of their way to help you. And that's the wonderful thing about it. And you'll both find this.
And have you noticed something? We seem to have a touch of a rub of the green, if you like, if nothing else. I mean, we had Mike Craven on and he won the Gold Dagger. We had Chris Whittaker on and he's won the Gold Dagger now.
Tariq here.
Well, this is it. I'll be the exception that proves the rule. Don't worry.
No. We've had you on and we'll have Marco on as soon as his book gets published. So.
Excellent.
Well, we're still waiting to hear back from Aaron Sorkin, but I'll maybe chase him up. I'll just use some guilt on him. That'll be fine.
Yeah. And Marco, see what you can do as well. I can see you've got your Italian poster up. Your
oh yeah. I'm enjoying that at the moment.
You're a double winner. You're Scottish and Italian. You can't be a happier person.
Exactly. The only two teams England didn't beat.
Yeah.
Hey, he's still a bit raw, guys.
Sorry,
Bass.
So what's next for you both? What have you got lined up?
What have we got lined up, Vass?
Well, I'm plugging The Dying Day as we speak, trying to get as many people to buy it as possible.
When's that out?
Last week. It's out now. I mean, it's going well. I'll be honest. It's going well. I'm getting some reviews in the press, and lots of the stuff that's coming back is really super positive. So,
and I hate to say it probably is your best work yet, and you've just won an award for the last one. So, it's going well. I have to submit the third one in a couple of months. So that's where I am. My quote, which I hope is going to be on the cover, is "So good it makes me sick." That's going to be. You're going to put that on the cover of the hardback, right?
Wait, is that in regards to my face, or?
Mate, you can use it in whatever context you like. The important part is it makes me sick. Right? But no, you should seriously, guys. It's a fantastic book, and it's going to do great. It should do if there's any justice.
What about you? What have you got coming up?
So yeah, I've got the fifth book, Shadows of Men, which is out this November. Hopefully things will be back to normal by then. We can do a wee bit of a book tour, which would be lovely. It's been so long. After that, I'm working on this standalone, which seems it's going to take a wee bit longer than I thought it was. But after that, there'll be another Wyndham and Banerjee novel, and then another standalone. And then we'll see if anybody's still willing to pay me money to write.
And would either of you ever want to write in a different medium, like script writing or anything like that?
Yeah, I've done that already, and not very successfully though. I've written 2 movie scripts which didn't sell. I've written a TV series which is out at the moment in India, Netflix India.
Cool.
We haven't had it hasn't been picked up yet, so it's far from fantastic. But the act of doing it was because I love screen, I love film, so the act of doing it was quite a good learning experience.
Nice.
I mean, my problem, as you've seen, is that I'm not the most organised of people compared to Vass. So I would love to do some screenwriting one day. I've just not got the bandwidth. I've just not got the time right now. As long as people are buying the books, and that's basically my living now. I'm going to concentrate on those as long as I have to grow what I've got. If at some stage, things change, there's whatever, I'd love to write something one day for the screen, but that's a different skill set. That's different talent, I think. Yeah. And that would take a lot of learning.
We could work on an erotic novel together, 50 Shades of Brown.
Can you imagine how brilliant that would be? That would probably be the best thing ever written. If you can get the chapters done by 7, I'll sort of edit it.
We could call her hero Marco, because that's a fairly sexy name.
Yeah. And we're both from the world of finance. We could call it Love Between the Spreadsheets. I think, guys.
That's not off the top of your head. You've put a lot of thought into it.
A lot of thought into everything, Marco. Everything's scripted. Yeah.
was the last book that you read, Vaseem?
It's actually, I'm in the process of reading it. I've just got to the last chapter. It's oh God, I'm going to make a hash of his name now. Ask him. Let me get his name up.
Okay.
It's a Finnish name. I'm going to make an.
You haven't actually read it, have you? This is it. You're just.
No, I haven't. It's called The Rabbit. It's called The Rabbit.
The last
The Rabbit
was The Dying Day by me.
Thank you for that extra plug for The Dying Day, which we haven't really mentioned yet. No, it's called The Rabbit Factor by Antti Tuominen.
Okay.
I don't know.
It's got a great cover. I haven't read that book yet.
I apologize, Antti, if I've completely mangled your Finnish name. But it's a terrific book. It's the one that's just sold to Steve Carroll's production company.
Right,
He's going to star in a version of it. It's
cool.
It's a crime novel with a darkly humorous bent to it.
Brilliant.
So I've just finished reading again the second time, The Less Dead by Denise Mina, which is her latest book, and it's set in Glasgow, and it's about a woman who is tracing her birth family and finds out that her mother was a prostitute that was murdered back in the day, and it's brilliant. What I always say about Denise Mina's writing is, if you want to learn how to draw characters and to do speech and to get into what people are really like, you should read Denise Mina. I don't think anybody is a better viewer of people or characteristics than observer of characteristics than Denise Mina.
Nice.
And now I'm reading The Dying Day by.
And what about the last film that you both watched?
Gosh, that's a one.
I can tell you that because I watch a lot of film. Yeah, I watch. I'm rewatching There Will Be Blood.
Nice.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, absolutely terrific film about an oil prospector in the early 1900s, played by Daniel Day-Lewis for his second of 3 Oscars, the only man to have done that.
And a guy who really likes his milkshake.
Is that right?
Oh no, Vaseem doesn't drink milkshake. It's got to be just plain straight up milk.
No, I'm talking about the film. Have you even seen the Blood?
Right. Oh,
it's a pivotal end scene with the milkshake.
Spoiler.
Right, yeah.
Spoiler.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I haven't got to the end yet, again.
Oh, well done, Tariq.
Oh, sorry, I've ruined it.
No. I watched it. I watched it when it first came out in the cinema.
Right, okay.
It's quite a few years, maybe a decade later now. So
has it changed?
Well, we haven't got to the milkshake scene.
All right, okay, well, we'll find out. For me, I haven't watched a film in ages, not at the cinema, so I can't answer that. But what I will do is give you another book, which is written by somebody you've had on, which I think is probably one of the best books of the decade, definitely the best book I've read this year, which is I Know What I Saw by Imran Mahmood. A fantastic book, I have to say. Again, it reminds me of Denise Mina in terms of just the depth of this book. It's literary. It's about a guy who is, once worked in finance and is now homeless, and he's convinced he's witnessed a murder, but nobody will believe him. And it's a beautifully written book. I'll go with that. I want to see that as a film. There you go.
Nice.
Excellent. And last TV show that you watched or are watching?
Well, that's a good question. That's.
My wife and I are binge watching. Oh God, what's her face? Do you want
some time to just find a program on?
No, it's the one with the sweater, the lady with the sweater.
The Killing.
The Killing.
Yes. First, all 3 series. We've just finished binge watching all 3 series.
Nice.
Excellent.
Cool. I never watched the original. I never watched the American remake.
Oh no, you should watch the
terrible like that. Yeah.
I didn't know there was an American remake.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah.
Oh,
no,
right.
but yeah. The American one's good. The Danish one's still better.
Okay, I will give it a shot because the woman Sophia, I can't remember.
Yeah,
the main actress is brilliant.
Sophia Lund.
That's it. Yeah. I do need to watch that.
No, it's both versions are brilliant. To be fair, as for me and the wife are watching the Ghislaine Maxwell thing at the moment.
Oh, yeah, is it any good?
It's all right. It's a documentary series on Sky, and it's good. In that you get an insight into the world of these people. You know how she went from the daughter of one very rich, rather unscrupulous man who ended up dying under really odd circumstances, to suddenly finding herself, with this new father figure, almost another powerful, unscrupulous man. So it's really interesting. In terms of TV drama, the last thing that we watched was The Hour, which is the sort of period drama set at the BBC.
That's the one with the guy from The Wire. I can't remember his name.
Ben Whishaw and a couple of other folk in that. Really interesting. So yeah, those were the two things recently.
Nice.
What about you guys? What have you been watching?
I'm currently watching Underground Railroad on Amazon.
Ah, right.
From the Colson White.
Yeah. I loved the book. Obviously a hard read, and it's an equally, if not harder, watch. But it's brilliant, like really brilliantly made.
Yeah,
Definitely
I need to watch that. We've been watching season 2 of For All Mankind, which is it's on Apple TV. It's one of the 3 shows which is worth watching on Apple TV at the moment, and it's basically a retelling of the space race, but if Russia got to the moon first, and so it's a kind of alt history. What would have happened? And it's brilliant. If you like sci-fi stuff, whatever kind of alt history, it's definitely worth checking out.
So, what are you two reading at the moment?
Other than The Dying Day.
Other than The Dying Day, I've just finished reading. I went on a sort of binge of Blake Crouch novels because I was trying to find authors that are similar to what I've written to put in comparison letters. But I read his most recent ones, which I quite enjoyed, Recursion and Dark Matter, and then I went back to Wayward. He did the Wayward Pines trilogy.
Fine. I stopped after the first.
Yeah,
see, I felt that way with I can't remember what the series. The Expanse series.
Yes.
Burns and stuff like that. I thought it started really good, but the 4th book was just tough going.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really tough going. I just gave up at that point.
I've just finished Project Hail Mary, the guy who wrote The Martian.
Andy Weir.
Andy Weir, yeah. It's good. It's much better than the second one, which I didn't like at all. The one set in the moon, and
Artemis.
This one's Artemis.
That was more of a YA.
Yeah. It didn't really work for me. But this is much more like The Martian, in which it's a kind of a guy trying to survive using science, basically. But it's not quite. I don't know. It feels too similar to The Martian, but not new. And a lot of it's solving problems with made up technology stuff. So it's not even like. Because The Martian was like he was using actual science to solve stuff, whereas this is using.
You know what happened there? That's a classic case of a writer having a huge success with their first book, and then deciding they can go off and write whatever the hell they want, and then getting a slap from their publisher and saying, "Just write the same as your first book again."
Totally, I think it was exactly right.
Title, it happens all the time. You laugh, Marco, but it happens all the time.
Have you read The Dying Day?
I've not even heard of this book.
You have now.
I mean, clearly the pair of you are big sci-fi fans like I am. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much looking forward to the final Expanse season.
Yeah.
In terms of the books. But the very, very last thing we ever do is a super quick fire, either or. So there's no right answer in any of these apart from one. And the first one is go for Denise Mina or Val McDermid.
I really can't answer that.
You get us in trouble if you make us answer questions like that.
We can't. We could do one each. We'll do one each. There you go. I'll say Val McDermid. There you
there you go. You split it.
Or we could just smoosh them together and it can be Val Mina.
I don't think you want to do that, mate.
Denise McDermid.
Right, nice.
What about US crime fiction or UK crime fiction?
On screen, US always. The Wire, Sopranos, etc. Hands down beats anything the UK can produce.
See, I turn it around, not just to cover all bases, but I'm really enjoying some US crime fiction. I'm loving S.A. Cosby's new book, Razorblade Tears. I love Attica Locke's work. It's different. For me, it's different, right? And maybe that's why I'm enjoying it more. But if we're talking about crime drama, British TV is far better. It's more realistic. So Vaseem's wrong, basically.
What about TV or cinema?
Oh,
cinema, always, yeah. I love going to the cinema late on a weekday where there's absolutely nobody in there, and you get a whole bag of pick a mix, about 10,000 calories worth, and you eat that while the trailers are still going on.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's when I'm round at Vaseem's house with his wife watching the TV.
She only watches soap operas. So.
Next question. I think we know the answer in Vaseem's case, but night owl or early bird?
Oh, he's both.
Yeah, I'm a bit of an insomniac, really, so I don't really sleep a lot.
He sleeps at the cinema. No, I'm a night owl myself. Actually, no, I've got to the age where I'm neither. I'm just an old man.
Yeah, we want to believe that we're still cool and hip and that we stay up into the night being edgy, but we're not.
We're more
fall asleep on the sofa.
Yeah.
What about a fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Fancy restaurant, easy.
Give it a rest. Every time we go anywhere, we end up in a KFC because
that's because you're paying.
No, you insist on KFC. Why are you trying to hide it now from this?
You can take the boy out of Glasgow, but
I'm not allowed to have KFC. If my wife knows I'm having KFC, I'll get into trouble. So.
I would agree with you that apart from the chips at KFC are disgraceful, but the Zinger Tower Burger is probably one of the prime fast food burgers you can buy, and I'm including McDonald's in that statement.
I would agree with that.
Excellent.
So what was your answer to food?
Yeah, what was it?
Kebab, isn't it? You're always eating kebabs.
Yeah, I've never denied the fact that I like a good kebab roll. It's you who always pretending that we're going to go to. He keeps luring me in whenever we're at a festival together, saying, "Look, we go out for dinner in the evening," and he keeps saying, "Yeah, we go somewhere nice. We go somewhere nice," and we always end up in KFC.
But this lovely chicken joint.
Do you know what his excuse is? His excuse is, "Oh, look, Vaz, it's a really good restaurant, but you know what? Let's go KFC because when I'm at home, my missus doesn't let me go."
It's not an excuse; it's the truth.
Tariq,
on our WhatsApp thread, we get photos every night when Vas goes for his walk. He'll send us photos from any kebab shop that he's in. He'll literally send us photos of kebab shops. Nobody cares.
The last and the most important question.
Last and most important question is real book or ebook?
A lovely hardback of The Dying Day.
I would agree with 90% of that answer.
You love The Dying Day that much?
Any form of physical book. I mean, there are horses for courses if I'm doing research or whatever, but 90% of the time, a proper book.
I was enjoying chatting to you guys, but
you've broken Tariq's heart. He is Mr. Ebook.
Of course, I know, but Tariq, you can get your book on a physical copy as well.
It's not that I don't read a lot of digital.
We've got what's his name? Mark. What's his name?
Mark 4 million book sales. Mark.
Yeah, Mark Edwards, right? We've got his books on hard copy.
As long as you guys aren't. Some folk have this thing about real books, and they talk about the smell of them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's.
I love the smell of a real book in the morning.
Exactly. Marco likes to smell real books.
Sort of inside kebab shops. So,
I have a Kindle.
Olfactory senses have gone.
I do use my. To be fair, I do use my Kindle extensively because I'm on the tube to work every day when it's not COVID. So I find it easier to read with the Kindle than trying to keep a book open in a when you're crushed in.
Oh, it's the worst.
You see how he's backpedaling here? Do you see that?
I'm glad I've convinced you. I'm glad I convinced
Desperate
you.
for Tariq to buy The Dying Day.
10 copies at least.
Well, thanks very much to Abir and Vaseem for coming on to the podcast. I really enjoyed that chat. I think it was a lot of fun and also very informative. And just in case you didn't manage to catch the name of Vaseem's book there, which is now out, it's The Dying Day. So you can pick that up in bookshops now. And as Abir said, his next book, The Shadows of Men, is out in November. But obviously you can pick up his previous books as well. And we'll put links to where you can get those books in the podcast description. Do also check out their podcast, the Red Hot Chilli Writers, because they've had some great guests on. And again, it's a lot of fun listening to that podcast as well. Now, as for us, next week we've got another great guest. We're speaking with Duncan Hamilton, the former sports journalist turned author. His first book, Provided You Don't Kiss Me, 20 Years with Brian Clough, won the William Hill Sports Book Award in 2007 and also won the Best Football Book at the 2008 British Sports Book Awards. And since then, his books on sport have won numerous awards. And this year, he's just brought out his first fiction book, still set in the world of sport, called Injury Time. And again, really worth picking that one up if you're into football in particular. He's a really great writer and really captures the essence of sport, even if you're not the biggest fan of some of the sports or figures that he's writing about. So it's a really interesting chat again, so I hope you can join us for that one. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.